I think my first memory, or my favorite memory, is grabbing oars and packs and hiking down the Chucker Trail for the first time. I didn't know what I was getting into. I had never seen the Gunnison Gorge before, and just the excitement and anticipation of what was going to be this floating fishing trip down this canyon, and it was spectacular. It was mystical. It was everything you would expect out of such a classic canyon.
Gunnison Gorge National Conservation Area. Spanning over 62,000 acres, Gunnison Gorge NCA is located between Montrose and Delta, Colorado, on the western slope of Colorado's Rocky Mountains. The rugged and often remote Gunnison Gorge offers recreation, wildlife habitat, and adventure to those who seek it. The story of Gunnison Gorge does not start with what we see on the surface today. In fact, the history of Gunnison Gorge stretches back millions and even billions of years. Dr. Julie McHugh is the curator of paleontology at the Museum of Western Colorado's Dinosaur Journey facility and has worked extensively in the rocks that make up Gunnison Gorge NCA.
So we are standing here today in Gunnison Gorge National Conservation Area. It's part of the Bureau of Land Management. And we are down here at the water's edge. And we are in what is called an incised valley, where a river has cut its way down through the rocks, exposing some beautiful badlands and cliffs behind me. Now, these badlands and cliffs behind me, you'll notice, are beautiful colors. They're reds and grays and kind of a marly pattern. And some of them are a little bit more resistant. They look like they're great for rock climbing. Those are sandstones. And then we have some that are forming these gentle, sometimes not so gentle slopes. And those are mudstones. So the different shapes that the rocks are making have to do with the different types of rocks that are making the shapes. So if you have a hard sandstone, you're going to get these blocky, angular shapes. And if you have soft, easily weathered mudstones and shales, they're going to give you these nice talus slopes. Now, these rocks, all of them, even the sandstones and the mudstones together, are part of the Morrison Formation. The Morrison Formation is a large geographical unit of rock. It appears in 9 different states. It stretches all the way up into southern Canada. And it is a rock deposit from the late Jurassic period. So this is back during the age of dinosaurs. Now, during the age of dinosaurs in the late Jurassic period, this area would have also been a floodplain with lots of rivers. So it's a river ecosystem now, and it was a river ecosystem back in the Jurassic period. I've said the word Jurassic, so you guys are probably already thinking it, but we'll just go ahead and say it. There were dinosaurs here. And we find dinosaur bones in the gray shale. We find dinosaur bones in the red shales, and we find dinosaur bones in the sandstone. The Morrison Formation is what we call a truly fossiliferous unit. What does that mean? It's full of fossils. There are lots and lots and lots of dinosaur fossils found in the Morrison Formation. There's also fossil plants, fossil invertebrates like snails and clams and conchostracans. You get fossils of fish. You get fossils of crocodile relatives. You get turtles, little lizards, little Mesozoic mammals, pterosaurs. So the Morrison Formation really preserves a whole ecosystem. And because there's so much of it in 9 different states, we can tell a lot about what was happening in the late Jurassic period from this geological unit. So rivers today have a bunch of different parts to them, right? So you have where the water is normally, that's called the channel, where the stream is supposed to be. You have where the water sometimes goes during times of flood, which is the floodplain, which is what I'm standing on right now, which is a little bit higher. Water's usually only occupying right here during the rainy runoff season. But back in the Jurassic, they would have had these times where water was confined to the channel and times when water was occupying the floodplain. And during times of flood and times where there was a lot of rain, it was a really good time to be around the river because plant life would grow really fast. You would have the animal herds that would come in to feed on the grass. You would have predators that were following the herbivores, so eating the other dinosaurs. You would have fish flowing in the streams. You would have lots of fresh water for the animals to drink, for the plants to soak up with nutrients. So it was sort of a good time in the ecosystem. Now today, in times of flood, we don't necessarily want to be down in the flood. You might get swept away. It's kind of dangerous, but those are times where, say, cropland gets rejuvenated with new nutrients, and it's a really good time to start your growing season in your gardens because there's a lot of fresh water and you don't have to irrigate as much. And it's a great time for plant life to get going. So we're standing next to some flowers right here during the spring runoff season. That's why we say May brings flowers. It has to do with the life of the river, with the river being infused with all this extra water.
Floods in the area were not something just dinosaurs had to contend with. When the modern Gunnison River cut its way through these ancient rocks, Ice Age animals had to deal with swollen rivers as the glaciers in the mountains began to melt. Museums of Western Colorado paleontologist and curator of education Stephanie Lukowski is an expert on ancient mammals such as these.
So right now we're overlooking the Gunnison River, and during the Ice Age, a lot of the environment that we see today would have been relatively similar. So there would have been the same mountains, there would have been rivers, the same kind of physical features that we're used to seeing today would have been here. But the glaciers were also still shaping the landscape, and so there were some major changes happening depending on where the glaciers were and whether they were melting or growing. So behind me in the Gunnison River, you can see a bunch of what we call terrace gravels. So these represent different levels that the river was, and so the river would deposit these gravels, these cobbles, these different rocks and sediments at different times. And so as the river has been flowing, it's been cutting down deeper and deeper. But during the melting of the Ice Age, or of a glacial stage, I should say, that water from the melting glaciers would flow down these rivers. And sometimes they would cause major flooding, and just major moving of sediments. And so a lot of times, not only do we find these gravels and these rocks, but we can also find beat up bones from Ice Age animals that used to live elsewhere and got flushed down through the glaciers. And that's how we find a lot of the Ice Age fossils we find on the western slope. Here, the animals we find in the interglacial stage, where it was occasionally warmer and wetter than today, we'll find that Columbian mammoth, which could be up to 13 feet tall at the shoulder. And they had these large, massive curly tusks and far less shaggy coat. We haven't found any of their skin to know for sure, but we assume because they lived in warmer climates that they probably didn't have that wool coat to keep them warm because they didn't need it necessarily. These type of animals like to live in grasslands, so they would eat tons and tons of grass as they moved around in these wide open areas. Unlike their distant cousins, the mastodons, which we also find and found in the Snowmass site, they liked forested environments. They were more like 10 feet tall at the shoulder, stocky build, kind of like the tank of the Ice Age. They had a bit straighter tusks, and some of them even had what we call mandibular tusks coming from their chins, which is pretty neat. And their teeth were made for eating bark and pine needles, like the type of vegetation you would find in the forest, which is where we find them, so it works out for everybody. They went extinct here at the end of the last glacial stage, just like all these other animals around 11,000 years ago. We find animals that you find today. We find all sorts of small rabbits, tiger salamanders. We find snakes and birds and bats. So these are really cool animals that are around today and we can relate to, but they also are Ice Age animals because, like I said, we're still in the Ice Age. So any animal you see today is technically an Ice Age animal.
But animals aren't the only ones to have used this river. The Utes and their ancestors have inhabited what is now called Colorado for thousands of years. They have been using this land and the water that flows through it to survive and thrive. C.J. Bradford is the executive director of the Ute Indian Museum in Montrose and is also an enrolled member of the Oglala Lakota tribe.
The museum has been here since 1956. That's when the doors opened. But there's more of a story before 1956. The Nooch people, as they call themselves, are history books still referring to as Ute. But the Ute people, in their stories, their voices, this is where they come from. They've always been here. And the museum here is a place where the Utes still come through here, stop, share stories. We just recently did a new exhibit in 2017, changed the storyline, because now it was through the voice of the Ute people that the story was being told. And our theme of the museum is that the history is written on the landscape. And that was said by Regina Lopez White Skunk from the Ute Mountain Ute tribe. And that's what the Ute Museum serves to do, is to share a better awareness of the Nooch people, the Ute people. Because just like you said, they are lumped into one category, saying the Ute people, and as you know, there are three Ute tribes. So here at the museum, we promote awareness, cultural awareness, and sharing the different Utes. And there's a lot that, of course, too, the Utes did have in common as well. But again, there are the three Utes, and even looking today, they're their own entity of being a sovereign nation, having their own tribal council, their leadership. My people, we say Mini-Wachoni, life is sacred, and to all is our indigenous people. And water, as we know universally, we survive, we live off Mother Earth and the water. But to the Ute people, that's something that is very sacred to them in their hearts, in their ceremonies, in their prayers, their sweats that we have, and there's water in there. But it's just something that water is something that we all have in common, just not, I think, just the Nooch people, but it is very much respected. Growing up, we were always taught about the many elements of life. Water, yes, being one of them, but it's also the wind, the sky, the mountains, the sunset, when the sun goes down at nighttime. So all these factors, these elements are just part of the Ute people, who they are, and part of their stories. Because even like with the animals, it was always said that the animals taught us. I just know we get our Ute people coming through, and even if people come down to our Chipeta Lake down the road, but they do like to go up in their areas on the reservations, fishing, hunting. But I do know many that are big fish people. Again, all animals, we're all thankful, from the four-legged to the two-winged to the fishes. They all give us something, and we're very much appreciative of that. Well, the Ute people made water vessels, which was made out of willow. They would construct the shape of the water vessel, which comes in various sizes, and we have some of these water vessels that can be seen here at the Ute Museum. And something I'd like to share with you, because it was shared with me by Clifford Duncan, an elder of the Uinta and Ure reservation, or also known as the Northern Ute tribe too. He would go with his grandmother, to gather willow, and would construct the shape of the vessel. And then he shared that they would go to a ponderosa pine, to a tree there, and take a section. But what they were getting from the ponderosa pine was the sap. And then with that sap, they would heat it up and put some pebbles, dirt clods, mix that in there. So essentially you could say they're making like a glue base. Then in the vessel that they had constructed, they would pour it inside on the outside to coat it, to make it airtight for the water. Now when they would pour it on the inside, they'd also put some larger stones. And so as they would shake the vessel back and forth, that sap would move around, and those pebbles would hit up against inside, packing it down, again, making it watertight, airtight. But that would be one way they would use these water jugs that were made from willow.
Every drop of water that flows through the Gunnison Gorge starts here, as snowmelt, high in the mountains of western Colorado. Before European settlement, this water would flow uninterrupted into the Colorado River and then on into the Gulf of California. Today, many water projects exist across western Colorado that allow modern society to tap into the resources of the river. So Blue Mesa Dam and Blue Mesa Reservoir are part of the Colorado River Storage Project's Upper Basin projects. This is specifically part of the Curacanti or Wayne Aspinall unit is what they call it here. The Colorado River Compact was signed in 1922 and it allocates water from the Colorado River and its tributaries to all 7 states that contain headwaters or the Colorado River flows through. The Upper Basin gets 7.5 million acre-feet of water a year, and the Lower Basin gets 7.5 million acre-feet of water a year. The dividing point is Lee's Ferry in Arizona, where most people consider the Grand Canyon to start. Blue Mesa Dam itself, behind me here, is one of 3 dams along the Gunnison River above Gunnison Gorge National Conservation Area. This dam is fairly large. It's an earth-filled dam, and it contains 3.1 million cubic yards of material. When the lake is full, it contains almost 1 million acre-feet of water in it. Today, the water captured by Blue Mesa and other dams like it along the Gunnison and Colorado rivers are used for both municipal water as well as irrigating crops that grow all across the West. This diversion of water from the river means that there is less water available to the animals that live in it. That means it is important for scientists and land managers to keep tabs on the health of the river. Eric Garduño is a fisheries biologist with Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and his job is to make sure that the fish of the Gunnison River stay healthy and plentiful.
Well, we just finished up electrofishing this section of the Gunnison River. We were able to catch a bunch of different fish, and we're just looking forward to teaching everybody about what we caught. So we have them in a tub here that has nice fresh water in it, so these fish are doing really well. They're nice and healthy. And the other thing we do to keep them healthy is we wear these gloves. They're just wool gloves. And once we get them wet, it helps protect the slime that's on those fish and also helps us hold the fish so that we don't accidentally drop the fish and take that slime off, which helps protect them from their environment. Okay, so this is one of our cool native fish to the Gunnison River. It's a flannelmouth sucker. They get this bright yellow and orange coloration. They're named the flannelmouth because they have these big lips. They use these lips to work down in the rocks and pull bugs and their food out of the rocks. They have these big, strong fins that are very powerful, so they're really good swimmers, which is important when they live in these big rivers so that they can avoid getting pushed downstream by the flow. The other thing that's really neat that these fins help them do is they go on long spawning migrations. We've documented these fish going several hundred miles throughout the Colorado River Basin to spawn. So it's really important for flannelmouth suckers that they have a connected environment where they can move up and down these rivers to find the habitats that they need. During those spawning migrations, they'll go into smaller streams, sometimes by the thousands, and go ahead and spawn. And then when they're done spawning, they come back out here to these bigger rivers. So that's the flannelmouth sucker. It's one of these really cool native fish that we have here in the Gunnison River, and we're definitely lucky to have it around. Okay, so this is a brown trout. It's one of our sport fish here in the Gunnison River. It's actually a non-native, so it didn't historically live in Colorado. Brown trout used to live in Germany and much of Europe. They still live over there, but when settlers came here to North America, they missed fishing for these fish from home, so they actually were able to bring these fish across the ocean and stock them into, a bunch of our rivers because people liked fishing for these fish. So these brown trout have an olive colored back. They typically have black or red spots and yellow or white bellies. They also have really big teeth. You probably won't be able to see it in the camera, but these have some really big teeth. When they're smaller, they like to eat bugs that live in the river. But as they get bigger, they use those big teeth to eat other fish. So these guys really like to eat other fish, and they're pretty aggressive predators, which is one of the things anglers like about brown trout. So they're a fun fish to fish for. When you're down here on the Gunnison, You can definitely catch plenty of brown trout. If you also are hungry to eat a fish, you are allowed to keep 4 brown trout out of the Gunnison, and they taste pretty good. So that's the brown trout, and I'm going to go ahead and let this guy go. So here's another one of our native fish in the Gunnison River. This is called the bluehead sucker, and you can see it has this blue coloration on its head, and also has this sucker-style mouth on the bottom of its face. If you look closely at these guys, they actually have a ridge in their mouth that allows them to get on the rocks and scrape algae off those rocks. So these fish help sort of keep our rivers clean by eating that algae. They also like eating small bugs off the rocks as well. They're really cool native fish. They're doing pretty well in the Gunnison, but just like the flannelmouth sucker, one of the biggest things that's been hard on these guys is dams in rivers, or even water diversions in rivers that prevent them from being able to swim up and down the river. These guys have been shown to go on spawning migrations of hundreds of miles. And just like the flannelmouth sucker, in the spring when it's spawning season, they'll swim out of these big rivers and into some small little creeks to go ahead and spawn. They'll spawn, and then the adult fish will swim back out into the main river, leaving their eggs in that small creek. Then the little fry, the little baby bluehead suckers, can hatch out in that creek. There's typically not very many predators in those creeks, so they can grow big enough in that first year or so, and then they go ahead and swim back out to the rivers, and you end up with a nice adult bluehead sucker like this. All right, so this beautiful fish is probably my favorite fish in the Gunnison River. It's one of our really special natives. It's called a round-tailed chub. You can see that it gets this beautiful orange and pink coloration on its sides. And it also is a very sleek fish. So this fish was designed to swim in these rivers, to handle high flows in these rivers. And they've been here for a really long time. One of the cool things about the round-tailed chub as a native is they have this big mouth in the front. They're actually pretty aggressive predators. They like to eat other fish. They'll eat things like grasshoppers, bugs that are in the river, pretty much anything. These guys are actually pretty aggressive predators. People do catch these when they're fishing here in the Gunnison, but because they are a native fish, you really just want to put them back so that we can hold on to this really special fish that we're lucky to have here in the Gunnison. So that's my favorite Gunnison River fish, the round-tailed chub. So this is another one of the sport fish of the Gunnison River. This is a rainbow trout. The easiest way to tell a rainbow trout is they always have this pink or red stripe on the side and these dots on their back. Rainbow trout are a non-native fish, so much like the brown trout, they were put in the Gunnison River and many rivers throughout the world as a fish for people to fish for. They really like to eat bugs, and one thing anglers like about these fish is they tend to fight really hard. They're known for jumping up in the air and really putting up a good tussle. So they're a fun fish for anglers. So even though anglers love fishing for these fish, they're actually not native to the Gunnison River. They're native to the western United States and Canada. So they stretch all the way from California north into Alaska. And they were brought here just for people to fish for them. Here in the Gunnison River, they've really suffered from a parasite called whirling disease that causes their little ones, when they're just small little fish, to not be able to survive. This parasite actually gets inside of the little fish and eats their skeleton and their brain, and actually causes them not to develop correctly. And so for many years, we just about lost our rainbow here in the Gunnison Gorge, but one of the cool projects we've been lucky to work on is trying to figure out some ways to allow these fish to survive with whirling disease. And we're really getting to the point that they're doing a lot better. We're starting to see those fish be born out in the river and survive all the way through. Even though the parasite's still here in the river, they've kind of developed some resistance to it. So we've been working to help them along in that effort, so that we can really have the best fishery that we can here in the Gunnison River.
Fish aren't the only things that biologists need to be concerned about in managing our lands and rivers. Dr. Nikki Grant Hoffman is an ecologist with the Bureau of Land Management, and she works to ensure that the health of animals and plants are considered in the management of our public lands.
So there are lots of different concerns. Some of the main ones, one is weeds. We have a lot of non-native species that have been moved around with people moving, with livestock, really through lots of different ways. And some of these species aren't that bad, don't have much of an impact, and some of them can have really big impacts on our ecosystem. So for example, cheatgrass or tamarisk are species that can have really big impacts on the system. So those are things that we're constantly watching and monitoring and treating, doing different treatments to try and keep our systems functioning the way they should be functioning. Other things, specifically with the Bureau of Land Management, we're a multi-use agency, so kind of our motto is multiple use, sustained yield. So we have lots of different things that happen on public lands, from grazing to recreation. We have lots of different kinds of recreation. People can horseback ride their ATVs, hike, go along rivers, camp. So we have lots of different recreation. We also have mining, really lots of different uses. And so we always want to know, how are those uses impacting our ecosystems and our lands? And so we'll do lots of monitoring and ask lots of questions about the different uses that we're allowing on public lands and how they're affecting the lands, and making sure that we're kind of guaranteeing that sustained yield for future generations.
In Gunnison Gorge, anglers know the importance of this connection between management and the resources, since they are one of the many groups that explore and use the public lands of Gunnison Gorge National Conservation Area.
My name is Kent Chevet.
My name is Jeff Dean.
My name is Trent Hanafius.
Hi, my name is Kate, and I'm with Gunnison Gorge Anglers, a chapter of Trout Unlimited Colorado. The nature is beautiful, but the fact that we have miles and miles of public access really makes this a gold medal fishery. The fish are here, but also the community is also really supportive of anglers, of recreation, and just a way to relax outside.
There was a program back in the 60s called American Sportsman. Kirk Dowdy hosted it, and he had a couple of sons, and they would go out to Wyoming, that's where they were from, and fly fish. I grew up in Nebraska, fishing sand pits, for warm water species. But we took a family vacation out to Wyoming one year, and that's where I caught my first trout. Wasn't on a fly rod then, but as we, as a family, continued to watch that program, we noticed this fly fishing, and it just looked so intriguing. And I ended up with a fly rod for my birthday one year, and my dad didn't know anything about fly fishing, so I took it upon myself to kind of teach myself how to do it. And I remember that first day setting up a 5-gallon bucket in the backyard and casting a piece of yarn into it. By the end of the next day my arm was so sore I couldn't hardly lift it. But I knew right there that I was hooked, literally. And it was something that obviously I've done practically my whole life.
Water for me is very peaceful and very relaxing for me. So any opportunity I have to get out on water is perfect. And then the actual act of fishing, as opposed to catching, is my happy place, which is fortunate because I don't catch a whole lot, and I'd be not happy if I didn't, depended on that. So.
Well, for angling in general, I'd like to see more of youth participation in it. Our numbers are dwindling, and as a result, some of these areas in that start dwindling too, because once they become a memory completely, it's hard to protect them. So the more people that are involved out here, the easier it is to protect and to maintain. It's kind of a dual-edged sword. So,
the gorge itself is very special because It's not real accessible, first of all. I mean, you have to make an effort to get here. Certain places are, but the places that I like to go are typically places you have to walk a little bit to, and you may or may not see somebody else on the river, or near you anyhow. And it's a place of solitude, great place to recreate. Always catch a couple fish, it seems like, and it's just a beautiful setting.
I want to keep it in public hands, obviously, keep the public access points strong and safe and accessible for everyone. Even though it may be difficult to get to the river, there's still a lot of ways everyone can enjoy it, and I wish to just kind of preserve that. I think we need to keep protecting all parts of the ecosystem, not just fish, so you know, keep in mind the birds and the insect habitat as well.
What keeps me coming back, all the hatches that I've yet to hit, all the fish that I've yet to catch, and a lot of memories I've yet to make.